to give that level of support.
What did you change after that to improve that coordination between national level and regional level?
Well, again, there has been a sense of focus at an interministerial level and cross collaboration of ministries, meeting from time to time with the ministers leading the process, and of course, Ministry of Works and Infrastructure, Ministry of Local Government, Ministry of National Security, and Ministry of Community Development.
How often do you have that kind of meetings?
Well, this is supposed to occur on a quarterly basis and so on. And of course, the input of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management playing a very important and critical role in this whole process. Because one of the challenges, I would say, in Trinidad and Tobago has to do with the outlook of the citizen from disaster preparedness, risk reduction, and so on. Because of the way the crisis, as I said, the last one, really that would have hit Trinidad and Tobago in 1963. There's this psyche in the citizenry mind that nothing will occur within the society, so that there has to be what I would call an intense sense of education and building that mentality to prepare the society for the eventuality of something occurring within the country.
Thank you, Minister. Ministro Augusto Espinosa, del Ministerio de Educación de Ecuador. Su turno, por favor.
Buenas tardes con todas y todos. Bueno, yo transmitiré algunas experiencias que he tenido durante los últimos 30 años para mostrar cómo el Ecuador en determinado momento no estaba preparado por un desastre natural.
Was not prepared for a natural disaster, and how we have been changing things. And quite right, we have developed a culture of security, of safety, and we have also developed the capacity of fixing things every time a disaster occurs, so basically of rebuilding. I remember that at the end of the last decade of the 80s, we had a very important earthquake in Ecuador. Some cities were affected. Houses actually came down. There were some dead. But at the time that was happening, during the earthquake, I remember we had no idea what to do. This is the families. We didn't know if we had to go out into the street, if we had to go to an open field, if we had to stay indoors. We did not know how to communicate with our family members who were outside. This happened at night. Many people were partying. I remember the young people were out. This was a weekend, and a lot of people were feeling extremely anxious. And at the end of the 90s, for my generation, it was very normal that regularly we would see in the news that there had been floods in the coastal area, that there has been a loss of life, that crops have been wiped out, and this would happen regularly. And it really seemed that we were used to it and that we just had to withstand the blows of nature. Afterwards, during the first decade of this century, some volcanoes were reactivated. The Tungurahua volcano that is still active, and I remember that also the Pichincha volcano was becoming active again, and we were very concerned for a natural disaster in the city of Quito. And I remember that once ash was falling on Quito, and we all thought it was the Pichincha, but it wasn't. It was the Reventador volcano, but nobody knew what to do while the ash was falling. In fact, many broke their windshields that would they didn't know what to do, so they would start using their windshield wipers, and then with the water the ash would solidify, and it was traffic chaos. So even though Ecuador had very high disaster risk, we were not prepared for that kind of thing. And I remember that for the last 7 years, since the beginning of this government, we started becoming more aware of the need of facing this danger with structural solutions. And so the Secretariat for Risk Management was created. This was a secretariat that started promoting a culture change, moving from prevention to response and rebuilding of the composition once a disaster has occurred. And so I would say that this policy that started being disseminated in Ecuador starts crossing across the different ministries. Before coming here into the room, I was chatting to our Secretary of Risk Management, Maria El Pilar Cornejo, and she was saying something that we had discussed in the previous cabinet, which was the possibility for an El Niño event this year. This was discussed in the cabinet about 3 weeks ago. And as soon as the ministers heard of what could probably may happen, we could start incorporating it in our actions before nobody would even consider what could probably happen. Today we're all aware of the information that we can get to take preventive actions. I was told that Minister Karina Hanse of Health was already considering how hospitals were going to adapt. Also in education, we are very attentive to what could happen. And I believe that we have changed our culture. And with all due respect to firefighters, we have stopped putting out fires. Now we know that we can react prior to an event. And in fact, we have been working in every scope. For example, in education, we have worked including risk management policy in all of the educational policy. Institutionally, we have gotten organized by district and circuit. Before, we would have 24 provincial directorates. Now we have more. And in each one, we have a team that manages risk and that can react at the different stages, be it planning or prevention. Now, for coverage, our infrastructure has grown in a very disorderly manner. Today, we are reordering our educational infrastructure, and before we approve a new school being built, we need to validate from the Risk Management Secretariat. So an assessment is carried out of the potential risk of that school, and also with our teachers, we are including in all of the networks of teachers. We are including training because we know that they are the main factors of taking care of the lives of our students. Also to guarantee the continuity of the educational process when there is a natural disaster. But what's fundamental is that we believe that the educational system should become the first instrument to disseminate a culture of security and capacity to react when a disaster occurs. To summarize, I believe in Ecuador, we have been including structural solutions to face natural disasters in every sector. Now, Mr. Nolasco of Jamaica, if you could please share your example with us.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I like to begin by saying that Jamaica is no stranger to disasters. In fact, we had a major earthquake in 1902, which sent an entire part of a city under the sea. That was the earthquake that destroyed Port Royal. In 1907, the city of Kingston was destroyed by earthquake and fire. And then we had a very long period of stability till the next major hurricane was somewhere in 1951. But one of the lessons learned from the earthquakes was the need for structural integrity. So most buildings in Jamaica today are overbuilt in terms of the steel and concrete that goes in it. However, when we had, after 1951, we had another major hurricane in 1988. And most of the substantial dwelling houses in Kingston, the entire roofs went. So they were structurally strong, but we didn't have a hurricane for such a long time that the building codes at that time were never even enforced. So many roofs just went, and we say Hurricane Gilbert was a roof hurricane. The last disaster we had was in 2012 when we had Hurricane Sandy, which essentially destroyed the eastern part of the country. That hurricane did significant damage to agriculture and houses of those persons who did not have substantial structure. And of course, those houses that were in low-lying areas or on the riverbanks were washed away. So we have had quite a bit of experience. And what we have done is to set up a whole range of disaster response capabilities. Every year in January, we treat January as Earthquake Awareness Month. And so the committees get together with the Office of Disaster Emergency Management and sensitize the country on earthquake dangers, and earthquake drills are done in schools and buildings and so on. In June, the National Disaster Committee meets to evaluate our preparedness for hurricanes. That committee is chaired by the Prime Minister and has all major ministries and agencies and civil society that we evaluate the capabilities of the country. Nevertheless, we still have difficulties in responding. We have, at the parish level, and Jamaica is divided into parishes, each parish has a disaster preparedness committee, which is chaired by the mayors. And so they have their own capabilities. And the idea is that centrally you can respond, but it is better always to have on-the-spot capabilities. So in the case of Hurricane Sandy, the committees went to work at the same time because the rest of the country was cut off. And so for quite a long time, we could only get to many areas by helicopter. But the committees on the ground did the work, and therefore they prevented loss of life and were able to mobilize local resources. In many cases, in the vulnerable areas, we usually pre-position equipment. So the heavy-duty equipment would be in the area, and they were able to clear critical roads and so on. So we are now looking at the legislation in terms of our building bill, which is our 1907 bill, which I expect to pilot in the Parliament this year. We've also completed a disaster bill. And those two pieces of legislation we hope will be utilized to create the necessary legislative framework to underpin the other work that we have done in disaster preparedness and management.
Cuéntenos algunos detalles, quizá lo más clave de ese código de construcción, de esa ley de desastres que usted cree que va a llevar a su país a estar.
Can you tell us some key elements of the laws, that maybe the building law, that will make your country be more ready to face a hurricane, for example?